welcome to today's Idea to Impact Forum. This is the last forum scheduled for this year. As our series has drilled down deeper and deeper into the nuances of effective idea development and product commercialization, we've come to the final task of starting a company and finding funding for project development. The last forum, we learned that small businesses are eligible for funding through Small Business Innovation Research Grants and Small Business Technology Transfer Grants. We call this free money because the project is advanced without giving up ownership. Today we look at bootstrapping or lean startup approaches and the money with strings attached, such as loans and angel investment. If you are attending your first Idea to Impact forum for this year, then let me briefly recall some of the high points that earlier forums mentioned. From our experts, we learned that successful innovators and innovators are different. They have a passion for making their idea a reality. But be warned that passion alone isn't enough. Successful innovators have to be smart and take advantage of as many resources as possible. There are a number of skilled advisors throughout the community who can assist you and may do it as a service with no cost, like the Small Business Technology Development Center. We have uncovered that there are mutual benefits of academic industry partnerships that can provide you funding and give you access to cutting-edge technology. Additionally, there is free money such as SBR and STTR grants available to help fund project development and get the idea out of the lab or classroom and into the commercial realm. Today we have another outstanding panel that will provide us with valuable insight into their knowledge and experience with bootstrapping and early stage investment. Facilitating today's discussion is David Mayo on the far end. David has served as business counselor for ECU's Office of Small Business and Technology Development Center for 5 years. He is a graduate of NC State University with a degree in business management and marketing and received his MBA from ECU. David's focus area with the SBTDC includes entrepreneurship, economic development, management counseling, business plan development, and fundraising. Starting this fall, David will become a faculty member in the ECU College of Business, where he will provide guidance on being an entrepreneur. Next, we have Mark Phillips. Mark is the Vice President of Statewide Operations and Executive Director for the Eastern Region of the North Carolina Biotechnology Center. Mark has over 30 years' experience in all areas of management, including human resources, finance, customer service, external governmental relations, marketing and sales, and economic development in the electric, telecommunication, and pharmaceutical industries. Mark has been employed with the NC Biotech Center since September 2009, and his current role as Vice President of Statewide Operations. He is responsible for the oversight and coordination of the 5 regional statewide offices and their activities. He also performs duties as Executive Director in the Eastern Region, in which he is responsible for positioning biotechnology in the entire Eastern Region, 27 counties of North Carolina, with short and long-term economic development goals through projects and strategies stimulating the development of biotechnology. Mark is also responsible for the facilitation of partnerships among government, business, academic, policy, and educational participants. By representing the regional biotechnology community statewide and by identifying and strengthening regional areas of application. He also identifies opportunities and assists in the establishment or recruitment of biotechnology companies and serves as a regional conduit, advocate, and primary contact to the programs and goals of the NC Biotech Center. Mark resides in Greenville and is married to Luann. They have 2 children, Austin, who is a rising sophomore and a EC Scholar recipient here at ECU, and Lauren, who is a rising junior at J.H. Rose High School. Next on the panel, we have Paul Hager. Paul is a professor in the biology department at East Carolina University and CEO of Chyrozyme. As a teenager, Paul was interested in proteins and enzymes, and it was at this time Paul first purified chloroperoxidase, a key intermediate in the synthesis of pharmaceuticals, in his father's lab at the University of Illinois. Paul received a PhD in biochemistry at UC Berkeley and subsequently did a postdoc with Herb Boyer, who founded Genentech. Soon after, Paul took a position at the Brody School of Medicine as a research assistant professor in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology, and then transitioned to the biology department as a teaching assistant professor. During this time, Paul, along with his father, co-founded Chyrozyme Labs, which produces chloroperoxidase commercially. Paul anticipates that the market for chloroperoxidase to rapidly grow as it is recently found to be a useful sensor of biological and chemical warfare agents. In addition to its science accolades, Paul is currently the president of the Greenville, USA Dance Chapter and is also an active motorcycle enthusiast and teaches several classes a year for the NC Motorcycle Safety Education Program. Rounding out the panel, we have John Austin. John is the director of Groundwork Labs, an NC Ideas-supported program to help selected entrepreneurs test and refine their ideas at no cost or loss of equity before they take their next step. Prior to Groundwork, John headed up Joystick Labs, an accelerator for video game studios, was CEO of Numerical Design Limited, a software company acquired by Emergent Game Technologies, and Division Incorporated, a virtual reality company that was acquired by HP. John earned an MS in computer science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1984, and a BS in electrical engineering from Valparaiso University in 1977. If you are new to the Idea to Impact Forum, let me walk you through the format. David will facilitate the discussion for about 45 minutes, then we will follow up with Q&A. You will see on your table note cards and pencils. Please use these to write questions for our panelists. Lucretia and myself, after the fireside chat has concluded, will come and pick up those cards. You will notice that the session is being recorded, so if you need to get up and move around, please don't walk in front of the cameras. It is now my pleasure to turn this over to David.
Well, we're going to spend most of our time today talking about dilutive funding, but before we do that, I understand there's some more non-dilutive funding that we can talk about, and since we all love non-dilutive funding, why don't we get the panel to tell us a little bit more if there's some other options for non-dilutive funding in the landscape.
Sure. I want to kick it off, John. Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to be here and represent the North Carolina Biotechnology Center. And there are handouts on the table, so things I'm going to reference, obviously feel free to take those. But there are several sources we look at. Obviously, we do have many grants that we obviously have as part of our portfolio. But another portfolio that we offer is a loan program. When we have various loans from company inception loans for really early startup phases, they go up to $50,000. In a loan format, and the terms are typically a 3-year turnaround. But there's also a couple of other loan programs, strategic research loan, which is up to $250,000, and then a strategic growth loan, which is up to $500,000. So these are what I'll call the funding type of programs. And then in addition to that, though, David, we also offer a baton program, and baton program may be where we work with Marty or Carlisle and their groups to make sure that an early phase company who may not have the sources like an accountant or an attorney or someone in the finance area or things of that nature. There's over 400 people that we network through across North Carolina that can offer those services. Some cases where someone who may be more technical may need a CEO role. There's retired CEOs out there who are still engaged. We utilize those folks in this baton network as well. So that's a really neat program that obviously is another source, and obviously the terms of that can be worked out between the individuals. So that's just a few examples.
Who would qualify for those other strategic loan programs?
Yeah, pretty much anyone early phase that has a presence in North Carolina and a significant presence in North Carolina. Really looking at those that early stage funding gap. So as long as you've got that presence, and obviously there's other criteria that work around that. Well, I know we'll get into the discussions around the specifications of what allows you to become responsible for those things, but that's pretty much the criteria we're looking at.
Thanks, Mark. Mm-hmm. John, do you have anything to add there?
Well, sure. I'll add the organization that I work for, which is NC Idea. And one of the things I always like to do is figure out how good a job we're doing marketing across the state. Who's heard of the NC Idea grant program? So we're doing a horrible job of marketing. So NC Idea is a private, even though it's got NC in the name, it is a private, not-for-profit, whose mission is economic development in the state of North Carolina by creating winning startups. And the way that we do that is with a grant program. where twice a year we have a grant competition. We typically get about 100 to 150 applicants, and we award 5 grants every 6 months of up to $50,000. It has to be a technology-based company. Most of our applicants are software, hardware, a few medical devices. You can kind of get over into a little bit of biotech stuff, but we don't do drug discovery and things like that. That's what these guys are all about. So we are really focused on information technology kinds of companies. These grants are to help you, as the name would imply, get from an idea to the point where you can raise equity funding. So the idea is you would take this $50K, maybe finish a prototype, maybe get some market research done, maybe build an MVP, and get to the point where you can raise equity funding. And it is non-dilutive. It is a grant. The only requirement is that for 2 years after the grant, you maintain a significant presence in the state of North Carolina, because after all, that's what we're trying to do. One other program, and none of us know exactly what the status of it is, there's a program called the NC Innovation Grant that for the last 2 years has awarded grants of up to $25,000 and the loan, I believe, of $100,000. I went to their website and they didn't have a deadline of the next cycle, so I'm not positive it's still active. And don't confuse that with the NC Innovation Fund that the treasurer has started with some state money. It's the NC Innovation Grant. But those are the 2 things that I wanted to highlight.
Thank you. But when I think about companies starting and I think about non-dilutive funding, something that comes to mind is bootstrapping. Paul, can you tell us what is bootstrapping and should I do it?
Well, bootstrapping is essentially pulling out your credit card and getting going. And if you're in the right situation, and that certainly was the case with Kyrozyme, I was able to amass the equipment and facilities I needed relatively inexpensively. And I'll just say for that means that we're not talking about buying anything new. eBay has been my place of choice to go get all the, and I need a fair bit of scientific equipment, and you buy used stuff on eBay, and you can get it for 5 to 10% of a new cost. So it makes it very affordable to get things going.
So when I think bootstrapping, I should think being thrifty with my money. After all, it's my money.
It's amazing how when it's coming out of your own pocket, it's very easy to be very cost conscious.
So you started the company with just yourself?
Oh yeah. Well, in fact, things are growing slower than I expected. So, and it's really a tailor-made company for a side project. So I use a fungus to grow an enzyme. The fungus takes a very long time to grow. So the most important thing is actually that you have good sterile techniques so that you don't contaminate your cultures early on. And then once the fungus has produced the enzyme, it's incredibly stable, so it can wait until I'm ready and have some free time to purify it. And then the purified material is very stable, so I can hang on to it and sell it off as orders come in. So it's really made to be a company that you can run on the side.
So I suppose that helped you manage doing 2 roles. So you're a professor here at ECU and you're running this company.
Yeah.
Any advice for the folks in the room who are thinking about doing that?
Well, these 2 things tailor together perfectly for me. One of the graduate courses I teach is in protein purification, and of course that's what the company is doing, purifying protein. So stick with what you know how to do really well. That's my first advice. Don't jump into something you don't really know what you're doing. And I think that makes things easier.
So you didn't pursue anything like crowdfunding when you got started?
Oh, no. That was,
So
look, I had to get help from these guys just to find a place to start up and do all that. I was really naive about all that stuff when I first started up.
I'm sure some people in the audience have heard about crowdfunding. How does crowdfunding differ from traditional equity financing?
It's a pretty broad set of stuff when you think about crowdfunding. I mean, the thing that folks have probably heard about is Kickstarter or Indiegogo, where you're crowdfunding essentially a promise that you might give you back something. There's no equity involved with that. It's non-equity crowdfunding. And you have to have kind of the right company and the right product for that to be interesting. I suspect it would probably be pretty hard for you to go out right now and get people to fund, the average guy or gal on the street to fund your company. But if you have particularly if you're building a consumer product where you could use non-equity crowdfunding as basically a pre-order, and the thing that something like Kickstarter really does that people don't think about is it's a great way to market your product, to get some visibility about your product, to test the market demand for your product. So if you go out with a crowdfunding campaign and say, well, you give us $100, you'll get 3 of our gizmos, and then you can take the results. If you take the results of that campaign, one of which is the money, which is great, but also the market demand to your next set of investors, you could get some investing there. So now, what I'm sure you've seen, it started with the Jobs Act a few years back, where we're trying to put equity crowdfunding in place, which is where instead of going to a accredited angel investor or a venture capitalist, you try and raise money from anybody out there. And so now let me break down this equity crowdfunding into kind of 2 buckets. One, equity crowdfunding from accredited investors, that is, investors that could just fund it as an angel would today. And then non-accredited investors, which is, again, just sort of anybody out there. Does everybody know what an accredited investor is? I'm assuming that, no, yes? Okay, I'll pause and, may I?
Yes, please.
Or would you like to? Or
no,
may I?
go ahead,
Okay,
please.
so if you're going to go out and solicit an investment for a company, you have to get it from an angel investor. That angel investor has to be accredited, which means they have to have a net worth of $1 million or more, or $200,000 in income, something like that. High net worth individuals. Yeah. And the purpose of that is your startup is a pretty risky proposition. It's much riskier than buying a couple shares of IBM. And the securities regulations are trying to protect people that can't afford to lose their entire investment. Because the odds are an angel investor in your startup is either going to lose all their money or you're going to hand them a pretty nice pile of money back. There's no in between like there is when you buy a share of IBM. It might go up 20%, it might go down 20%. It's an all or nothing. And the securities regulations are trying to protect people that really can't afford to lose a big wad of money. And so that's why you have to be an accredited investor to make an investment. So one way that has opened up in the last few years to crowdfund from accredited investors is something called AngelList. So it's basically a website where accredited investors can congregate. You can put your company up there, and these investors can see it, and it enables you to really, instead of just being able to talk to the angel investors in Greenville or Wilmington or Raleigh, you can get the word out to angel investors that are anywhere. And so that's a great thing, particularly if you live in a smaller town where it's not Silicon Valley. However, angel investing is usually a pretty local phenomena. If angel investors want to kind of see and touch your company because they're in at the early stage. So AngelList is not a great thing for you to just blast out there and say, hey, come fund my company in Greenville. Because an angel investor in Silicon Valley's got 800 deals they can look at within 3 miles. They're not going to get on an airplane, make 2 stops, drive from, they're not going to come here. But if you're trying to raise a $500,000 angel round, and you can get a couple $100,000 funded locally, from angels here, angels in Raleigh, then filling out that round, then it's a viable option. So don't look at angel list as the first step. Look at it as the step to fill out the round. Then we've got the non-accredited crowdfunding, which is legislation is sort of, right now there's legislation in the state legislature that everybody supports. Everybody supported it the last session, and they're having a hard time pushing things through as things happen in our government. But hopefully that will happen. What that will do is enable anyone to make an investment in a company. Now, whether that's going to work or not is still to be determined. The challenge is, at least the current set of angels and current set of venture capitalists are looking a little skeptically at this. So now we have this mechanism. What if you get 1,000 investors in your company? You've crowdfunded 1,000 investors. They've each put $1,000 in, so you've got $1 million in your company now from 1,000 investors. How is that really going to work out, having that many investors in a small company with them and 2 angels and 1 VC? So it's all still to be determined. So again, I wouldn't look at that as your first step. If you can't get an angel investor who's experienced and knows about looking at companies to get excited about your company, do you really want, somebody from Chapel Hill who's got $1,000 to spend to put money in it? I don't know. The last point I'll make, sorry I've talked so long, but
great.
You asked the question. The last point I'll make on this, the one thing you do want to be very careful on is these regulations, the way, if you do not make a public solicitation for an investment, that is, you don't, take an ad out in the paper, my company's raising $1 million, come invest in it. Okay, that's a public solicitation. You're really only supposed to be talking to, in private about this. So if you do that and then you crowdfund, the onus is on you as the company and entrepreneur to verify that that person is an accredited investor with the regulations the way they are today. And so they'd have to turn over their tax returns to you. And once you've made it public, that onus is on you. The problem is most angels don't want to do that. If they're, and I apologize, I don't know all the which regulation, there's a regulation 37.62. I should have looked this up. But anyway, so long as you don't make the public solicitation, you don't have to verify that the investor is accredited. They self-identify. They say, yes, I'm an accredited investor. And as long as you don't have some obvious evidence that they are not, that's good enough. And so you really want to make sure you're still doing that. And by obvious evidence, I mean, they're driving a 95 Impala with 200,000 miles on it and living in a shack or something, so anyway.
So to summarize that, three types of crowdfunding. So you have kind of what's happening now that's a donation or a pre-order,
Yep.
A pre-sale of
Kickstarter,
inventory,
like
Kickstarter and the like. That really doesn't pose any issues for raising later stage investment.
Correct.
Then you have crowdfunding from accredited investors, and that doesn't raise any issues either because they're accredited. Where potential issues may come up is if you're raising funding from non-accredited investors, and those regulations are forthcoming.
And in fact, you cannot do that in North Carolina yet. Hope you may be able to do it soon.
I've heard angel investors say they're not very excited about some of the proposed regulations coming down. In your opinion, do you think those regulations will happen anytime soon? And if so, how will that affect the funding landscape?
It always seems it's 3 months away, and it's been 3 months away now for 2 or 3 years. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about angel investment. Are there angel investors here locally? We talked about there being a big group out in California. I know there's a lot in Atlanta and DC and Seattle. Are there angel investors here locally?
Sure, they are. There's a group called Inception Micro Angel Fund. We got one called IMAF East There's also one called Coastal Plains, IMF Coastal Plains out of Rocky Mount. Been in existence now, David, probably 3-4 years, and it's probably 75 members in this group here in the East, about another 30 to 35 in the Rocky Mountain Division. What's really unique about this Inception Micro Angel Fund is there's several across the state, and you'll have obviously anyone, small business entrepreneurs wanting to come looking for other investment opportunities, and that's what an angel fund really is, as John just alluded to. And a lot of times they're trying to strap money from friends, family, whomever they can, just to get that, as Paul said, that bootstrap. He uses credit card. Who can you get cash from? A lot of folks we see coming to IMAF are folks that have looked at a loan from the Biotech Center. So we vet that process pretty carefully. And in vetting that process, if we as an organization are going to give you a loan, that's a pretty good mechanism that what you're offering is pretty substantial. It meets a lot of criteria because we put a lot of emphasis around those things. So IMAF groups or any angel group likes to see that kind of vetting process as part of their due diligence process. But what's really interesting also for these IMAF organizations per se is there's probably 7 or 8 across the state. So let's say if the Greenville or the East chapter may give $50,000, then I would call someone in Charlotte or Piedmont Triad area. They would reach out to us and say, I saw where you invested in this group, so this particular individual and or company may then go to these other IMF groups. So there are quite a few around. There's an entrepreneurial initiative here in town as well. So there are quite a few that are out there.
So there's, from what I understand, there's individual angels, there's angel networks,
Yeah.
and there's angel funds. What's the difference between those?
Go ahead, John, on that.
Go ahead, John.
Well, an individual angel is an individual high net worth individual. Angel groups get together, have dinner together, evaluate deals together, but make individual decisions about whether to put their money in. Right. So if this is the angel group, you would pitch your company to us, and Mark looks at it and says, not for me. Paul looks at it and says, hey, I'm in. You know, and you're trying to convince all 4 of us individually. It's not a committed capital fund. So RTP Capital in the Triangle area is of that ilk. Now, IMAF is IMAF that way? IMAF is a fund.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the next stage is an actual fund where the angels have banded together and they have committed to put money into the fund, and the investment committee of that angel group makes one decision and for the whole fund. And then again in the Triangle, there's Triangle Angel Partners, is a group of that ilk. Co-Founders Capital is just raising money. It is a committed fund like that as well. And not only do the IMAF folks talk to the IMAF folks, but I can assure you that the IMAF folks talk to the RTP Capital folks. And so it's really getting that first one involved and engaged. And then you've got, now you're not the only one out there trying to raise money, but if you've got an excited angel group or an excited angel, they'll be out there talking to other folks as well. So it's getting that first one. So
Paul, you decided to start your company without using angel funding, is that right?
Yeah, well, I was in a position to acquire a lot of the equipment I needed very easily, and my department was very supportive in letting me sort of store that stuff and get it set up until I had a space to put it in. And so it all came together very easily for me, which might not be the case for most people, I'm afraid.
When you were starting out, I know you were thinking, what happens if sales grow very fast and I can't afford to fund this growth? At what point would you have said, yeah, I'll take on some equity capital investment, or was it just not an option for you from the get-go?
Well, because my dad had purified the enzyme previously and set up an agreement with a chemical company called Sigma, we already had a little pipeline going of fairly steady orders. Individual researchers who want to work with the enzyme buy it from Sigma. And so, you know, I had a small amount of money to keep things rolling right off the bat. So it hasn't been a need for me to jump up, although I'm I wouldn't mind having that happen soon. And then I'll come and talk to these guys about how to handle that next step of it. But so far, that hasn't been an issue for me.
I mean, when you talk about non-dilutive funding, that's the best non-dilutive
It
funding
is.
you can have is customers paying you to give them one of your gizmos. You know, it gets you traction. You know, your objective is to build a great company. Your objective isn't to raise money. And if you can build a great company by taking orders and selling stuff, I mean, that's great.
So when we look at this on a range, we have using your own money really early, and we have some of those, you know, the SBIR that we talked about last time. Then we have small grants, mini grants, grants from NC IDEA, loans from biotech. Then we move into angel investment, maybe from private individuals, then up to funds. And then there's something above that called venture capital. So what is venture capital, and how does that differ from angel investment?
There are several differences. One is typically a venture fund is investing not individuals' money, but things like pension funds money, TIA, CREF. You know, they'll take, you know, some fund, some pension fund, for example, will have, you know, they'll have a portfolio of stuff they'll have their money invested in, you know, stocks and bonds, and they'll take a sliver of it and put it into venture funds. Venture funds are typically larger, 20 to 100 to 200 million dollars, $500 million, larger funds, and as a result, they're going to invest larger chunks of money. If I'm a venture capitalist and I've got a $500 million fund, I can't run around investing it in chunks of $100,000, or I'd have a portfolio of 1,000 companies and I couldn't keep track of them all, because a venture fund is typically, you know, a handful of partners. So they're going to invest typically $1 million or more. And so you need to get to a stage that you're ready to take $1 million before you start talking to them. And beyond that, the terms of the investment are very similar to the terms of an angel investor. They're going to take a slice of your company. They're going to probably want a board seat. But really, as far as the entrepreneur is concerned, it's $1 million and up. There is one seed stage fund in Raleigh called Idea Fund Partners. Full disclosure, they've got a close relationship with the NC IDEA grant program. But the Idea Fund Partners will invest, it's probably a $10, $20, $30 million fund, so it's kind of almost in between one of these angel funds and a big VC fund. And they'll invest couple $100,000 in a round, lead an early round with the idea that they would fund up to maybe $1 million in the next round.
So with that being said, what size funds or angel investors looking to put into a company?
What's the
It can vary. I mean, you can. I've seen them from 25 to 50,000. I've seen it up to 100, 150,000. The way the structure of the IMAF works, you've got this group of investors who each have a seat, and they have a vote per se, and it's 66 2/3. The majority is the vote. Then you invest in that. But if somebody really likes that idea, they can then add on money to what the IMAF group is doing essentially. So let's say, Dave, you're a member and you really like this idea that Paul has, and all of a sudden the group itself says, Paul, we're going to give you $100,000. But David really likes it, so David's going to say, I'm going to throw in another $50,000 of add-on money personally. So it can be a variety of that things, but typically on average, we're seeing somewhere between $50,000 to $150,000 type of investment.
Okay, and I know you mentioned the IMAFs can syndicate as well,
Yeah.
and can also syndicate with other investments to get that investment chunk up there pretty high.
Right.
So, any advice for folks looking at that gap between looking at angel investment and looking at venture capital investment? See, Mark mentioned a seed stage gap where people have trouble finding that very first money. IMAF helps to fund that earliest stage money. Any advice for that next gap in between angels and VCs?
Well, you've got, obviously, these early stage fundings help leverage some of that further additional funding, but you've got, but it's a lot of pieces of the puzzle to get to that point. And as John was saying, these venture capitalists, that's big monies, and to get to that stage, your company has to have some pretty good traction as you move forward to that. Whether it's you work out toward an NIH type of or NSF type of grants to pull in addition to some of these early stage loans or seed monies. That's another important vehicle as you move down the pipeline. But it's all of what we've talked about, from the crowdfunding to the VC's monies to the various grant programs. But you got to have sometimes that to hit that very early emphasis. How do I get from this, what I call that valley of death, from that phase 1 to that phase 2 to phase 3? That trough of funding really drives up pretty quick. So that this first phase is really an important piece of that, obviously.
What are investors looking for in the funds, in the companies that they're putting funds into?
Anything they think they can make money out of. I'll speak just from the local groups here. Med device is a really hot item right now, and obviously I'm from the biotech sector. I'll kick around a few ideas, but med device, pharma, life sciences type of activities, whether it be a device that is relative to that. But we've seen things such as a local group here who does like an e-learning and a tool assessment to try to find student athletes who may be a really good fit to the workplace. So it could be a range of things, and we've seen people come in with, I've got the new type of toothbrush, that kind of stuff. You just never know. And that group, you've got to convince that group that this is the next best thing, and hey, I want your funds here. And that's truly, it could be a matter of anything.
Yeah, some will look at anything. Others, they have a little bit of a bias towards a certain thing. So again, Idea Fund Partners, they don't do life science investments. They don't feel like they've got the expertise. They don't have the size of fund that can do follow-on Series B, Series C, Series D for, if you're doing a drug, it's going to be $80 million in 5 or 8 years. So they just don't have that. So you do have to kind of know whether they're completely agnostic as far as market or they do have a specific market. It's got to have reason. It has to be a big enough idea that it can return something to the investor. You're a pretty risky bet, and so they're looking for a pretty big return on their investment. And if the total market opportunity is under $100 million, I don't know. They're looking at the team. Do you have the sort of key expertises covered? Do you have a CEO? Are you full-time? It's tough to raise investment if you're doing it half-time. So those are some of the things that investors will. And of course, is it a good idea? Can you make money out of it?
What about red flags? The flip side to that, I know the fund manager here for IMAF East, he always asks everyone who presents, who's your competition? If they say there's no competition, it's a big red flag. What are some other red flags that you've run into?
Well, I think it's another thing he asked. What keeps you up at night? I mean that's a relative question, and what keeps you up at night? I guarantee you can give us a long list of answers. But you look at things in their whole pro forma. Can they present their story really well? And if you're seeing flaws in the story, when you really start digging down deep, it's most likely a flaw in the business plan. But do they have a good business plan? As John just said, do you have a management team? He may be a great technical person, but is he really the CEO? So does he have a CEO? Other red flags is, are you paying yourself an exorbitant salary? And if you are, that's probably a red flag, considering you're out trying to raise money, but you're driving not that 75 Impala, you're driving that 2015 nice ride. So it's a lot of things of that nature. So it's really being able to it's just common sense in some cases. Really, what you're presenting, and if I ask you, what's your exit strategy? And if you're stumbling on what's your exit strategy, most likely that investment team is not going to bet on you, because they're there for one reason: how quickly can they get money and return on their investment?
So you mentioned exit strategy. Is So is that a requirement to get rid of your company eventually?
Pretty much so, eventually.
Okay.
Some of us locally, we know a gentleman by the name of Phil Hodges who ran Metrics. And Phil sold it after 19 years. And I asked Phil one day, I said, how long have you been trying to sell it? He said, since day one. And so he said, unfortunately, it took me 19 years, but fortunately, he made a very successful and lucrative opportunity after 19 years. And I go back to what I hear Paul say. I can hear Phil tell that story. Within the first 12 months, he tapped his credit card limit twice to ensure he paid payroll for those, twice out of that 12-month period. So yeah, everybody sees the success, but it's a lot of early heartaches and to get to that point as well.
What percentage of the whole thing is the idea? How important is the idea? And Paul, if you want to take, how important is the idea in starting the venture?
Well, I think that's what drives everything, makes everything go. I think the question I have is if you have a really great idea, and I mean, I haven't had to go out and offer up some of my equity to drive the investment, but how do you make that decision? How much of my great idea am I going to let other people jump on? How do you balance that?
Gut feel. It's hard. That's so true. I mean, what equity position do you really want to give up? And some people, I see this quite often, as we say, they can't let go of their baby. I mean, they built it from the ground up, and they don't want anyone else close enough to be that CEO management team. And when you talk about exit strategy, they're like, do I really want to exit with it? So that's a lot of questions you have to ask yourself as well.
From the investor side, it's not necessarily what the percentage is. They're looking at what's this exit going to be. So if you put in $1 million, you're looking to get 10 or 20 times your investment out here. And so they're looking at how big this company can grow and then working back. And if 30% will give them a good enough return, that'll be fine with them.
That's right.
40%, I mean, they're going to try and get as much as they can. But at the end of the day, it's kind of a complicated equation. And especially the earlier you are, the less there is that's known. Right. I mean, it's more art. The earlier you get, it's more art than science. And at that point, it just becomes sort of what other deals look like that are similar to yours.
What valuations are you seeing in companies?
Could I go back and be contrarian for a minute?
Sure.
So the idea, we were talking about the idea.
Yeah.
And in certain companies, in certain industries, it's a drug, for example. It's all about the intellectual property. In other businesses, let me tell you, there's a lot of smart people in the world. A lot of smart people. And if you've got some sort of software internet-ish idea, somebody else probably has it, okay? And so it's all about execution. And the strategy and executing on it faster than someone, better than someone. There's a lot of similar ideas out there. So I'll just say that.
Yeah.
I can't remember at all what you asked.
So originally I'd asked how important is the idea?
Well, no, that one, but then the question that I diverted.
And so what you're saying is not just the idea, but also your management team is extremely important, and maybe experience in the industry doing something before?
Yes, and that always helps. That always helps, I think, as investors are looking at a deal. If somebody's had a previous exit, it's going to be really easy for them to raise money. But everybody was a first-time entrepreneur at one time. And so you can make up for that with a lot of knowledge, skill, chutzpah, drive.
And the follow-on to that was, what valuations are you seeing with companies now?
So you should probably talk about more of the biotech side, but Groundwork Labs, the thing I do is mostly hardware and software companies. And if you look at if you start at very early stage companies, so two people with an interesting idea in IT or hardware or software, the valuation of that kind of gets set by what accelerators do today. So if you've got just an idea and you're going to go into an accelerator like Techstars or Startup Factory or 500 startups, they're typically offering $50,000 for 7.5% of the company or $20,000 for 6% of the company. So you're looking at, if you got an interesting idea and you look like a good team, $700,000. That's with no code on the ground, nothing. Angel software deals, $1 million to $2-3 million, depending on the stage. Again, software companies. I think I heard an angel say the other day the average angel deal is $3 million valuation, first round, something like that.
Yeah, that's about right.
Biotech, I have no clue.
It can be across the board. I mean, ironically, I saw one this morning where somebody we had given several grants and one loan to, and they just got picked up yesterday for $1.2 billion. So, and yeah, that's a grand slam. Don't get me wrong, but $300-400 million is very likely to see some of these companies that are like that. I mean, it just all depends who wants it, who wants to acquire it in that market space. One of the things we haven't kicked around, market opportunity. What is the opportunity out there? What can it shed, and so that's a big piece of it when we're looking at all these things. Is it a market out there? You may have a great idea, but if you don't have a market opportunity, it's really not that good. So that's another big piece.
Well, so we're getting toward the end of our discussion, and we're talking about valuation. If I could get your thoughts on, it's a problem if you raise at too high of a valuation. It's also a problem if you raise money at too low of a valuation. Can you talk a little bit about finding that happy median, and what are the issues if you raise too low, and what are the issues if you raise too high? And this is probably a good question for John.
Well, if you raise too high, and you sometimes see this where folks are raising a friends and family round, and so you tell Aunt Molly, hey man, I got this great idea, and Aunt Molly just loves you to death. And Aunt Molly says, well, sure, I got $30,000 tucked under my mattress. I'll give you 30 grand. What do I get for it? And you say, well, the valuation's 10 million. Because Aunt Molly doesn't know, right? And so you take Aunt Molly's $30,000 and you get some software built, and you call up IMAF and you say, hey, I want to raise some money. I got my first 2 customers. What do you think my valuation? Can I get 200,000? What do you think the valuation is here? $1 million, $2 million? Well, Aunt Molly's going to be unhappy.
That's right. Because
Aunt Molly just had a down round, and so what she thought was a $10 million company is now a $2 million company because this guy's a little smarter and he valued it at $2 million. So that's the problem that you can get in with your early investors. And I'm sort of taking the sort of exaggerated case there, because certainly if you take angel money at a $3 million valuation and you don't make any progress and you got to go back out, those investors are going to be happy as well. The other end, I mean, you're just going to give up more of your company than what you might be comfortable with, and it's a marketplace, right? It's not just about what your idea is worth; it's about what the alternative investment is for that angel, because they're looking at 5, 10, 20 deals out there, and so they're looking at a deal here where they can get 30% of the company for $300,000, or over here at your deal that might be 10% of the company for $300,000. You got to give them a much better reason to invest in yours. So it's art as much as science.
It is.
And a marketplace. Yeah. It is a marketplace.
Yeah.
Wow. There's certainly a lot to think about when going after angel investment and venture capital investment. We're running out of time. Can you please give your final thoughts and final advice on what should everyone think about as they get this company started, from bootstrapping it to raising angel capital?
Well, let me start with the bootstrapping stuff, because I said I love to buy a lot of equipment and stuff on eBay. So my comment there is expect it to fail. I have backups of everything.
And I would say, make sure you have, and I've said this earlier, but just make sure you have a good, coherent story. Make sure the red flags we talked about, make sure you have a management team in place. Make sure that you've got a market opportunity. Make sure there's commercialization opportunities. If it's great in research, but it's no market, nowhere to commercialize it, we're probably not going to invest in that. So looking at all those, and obviously if it's life sciences, obviously we talked about this from the IP stages and the licensing staging, but really have a good coherent story and blend all those pieces together.
So I'll give you a flip answer and then I'll explain it. Have a working spouse. And people have asked me, what's the characteristic of most successful companies that have been through Groundwork Labs? And I say they have a working spouse. What that means is they have enough financial runway that they can get their idea developed to the point where they can either get enough revenue to bootstrap it themselves, go to an angel group and get some funding. So the real answer there is make sure you've got enough financial runway that you can give your idea the time and energy that it deserves.
And David, in closing, I have a very successful entrepreneur friend out of Raleigh, and he always told me, if you're not standing on the edge, you're taking up too much room. So that's my closing thought.
Thank you.
How important is a definitive timeline for product development? And does a long development sort of timeline scare away investors, such as in the pharmaceutical?
I'll try to take that. Pharmaceutical, not so much, because the timeline is so stringent and it's so long. A lot of that is based off regulations that the FDA presents. So, you'll know that it's going to take you 10, 12, 13, 14 years in some cases to get it through to a commercializable standpoint, Carlisle. Obviously it's going to take somebody with a very accumulative wealth, accumulation of wealth, but also a tremendous amount of risk tolerance as well, because these companies obviously have a lot of hurdles to go through just in the clinical trial standpoint to get it from phase, as we talked about, 1 to a commercializable standpoint.
It's not so scary, but it does affect valuation,
Yes,
right?
it
So
does.
you said if you have to have a certain return over a certain number of years, if it's going to take 10 years to get finished, your valuation is going to have to reflect that to provide the return to the investor. So expect, if you have a long runway, for it to cost you in equity.
True.
This one is directed towards Paul. Would you do it again? And if so, would you do it the same way?
Oh yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Well, I had a couple of stumbles with my academic versus business stuff that I could have handled smoother. I would change that part, but otherwise, no. Everything, it's all a go. Yeah.
This is for John. Everyone seems to have an app idea. Do apps make good companies?
Rarely. I mean, the barrier to entry is low. The competition is stiff, and there's lots of different kinds of apps. So if it's another video game, man, that's a really tough market to get involved in. But if it's a unique idea that has that you can get to an audience relatively easily, if it's sort of taking things that we do in other ways and taking advantage of the fact that now everybody's got one of these in their pocket and it's really smart and it's really powerful in a unique way, there can be a company there. Uber's doing pretty good. Mm-hmm. It's an app, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, don't completely discount it, but if it's better be pretty unique.
If a researcher has an idea for a biotechnology product, but not sure if it would be marketable, what steps should he or she take to help make the decision going forward?
Well, first of all, I'd go to your technology transfer office without a doubt. Mm-hmm. Look and see if you got something that has IP, that can get a license, etc. Once it's vetted through that potential piece of the avenue chain, we take a look at things that just, are there grants out there that you've submitted for? What kind of response you receive from those. And then some of the things we just talked about. I mean, from a biotech standpoint, and biotech is a relatively vague term. There's a lot of things that fit under biotech. That can be from med device to a true life science product. It can be a nanotechnology. You know, it can be marine. It can be ag. It can be a lot of various pieces of it, Carlisle. But I would take that first step. If it's something you're doing with inside the university, make sure your technology transfer office really is involved up front early on.
I'd go look up Steve Blank. I'm a huge fan of his. He's a lean startup. He's been one of the leaders and thought leaders in that area. And over the last couple years, you know, and so usually you think of these minimum viable products in the software space where, you know, you go off over a weekend and you create a little app and see if there's any traction in the marketplace. But he's done a lot of work in the last couple years with, is it iStart now? Is that what his?
I'm not sure.
Google Steve Blank Biotech or something like that, and you'll find that he's starting to apply some really lean startup techniques to products that take 10 years, and you'd think, man, how could that work? And so I'd go read up a little on him.
We have a lot of great questions. Is there a risk in having many small investors, or is it better to have a few large investors?
You want to take it?
I mean, better is few larger, I think, just because you got, you know, fewer, you know, people to answer to. But sometimes you can't be picky, right? And so, you know, you take what you can get.
It's also important to stress that to have accredited investors, because if you do bring on non-accredited investors and you go into a later stage round and try to raise with accredited investors, they're not going to do it. There's legal risk there for them, and just like John pointed out, they have 100 companies to choose from and they choose 5. It's very easy to fill your spot with someone else if there's a potential problem.
Should the company do research on the investors, or is any money good money?
Absolutely.
I do my homework. I do my homework.
Absolutely do your homework. Again, maybe you can't be quite as picky. You never can tell, but certainly. And a good investor will give you names of CEOs that they have invested in and invite you to call them. Yeah. And you should then ask those CEOs, do they know any other CEOs? So call the ones that the names of the people they didn't give you. But a good investor should be more than willing to let you talk to CEOs that they've invested in.
You want people who are making investments as well. So there's some people out there who call themselves angel investors but haven't made investments. So if they haven't made an investment in 6 or 8 months, don't waste your time.
Are investors more interested in dividends or a lump sum from an organization or IPO?
I think they're just investing in cash, personally. It all depends on that particular person. A lump sum could obviously do some certain things to jumpstart them for some other investment opportunities, but also it could be how they're looking at their return as well. So, I mean, I think that's kind of personal, almost to the investor level.
Yeah, I think there are angels, individual angels, that would be willing to do some kind of dividend deal. But once you look at funds, which are, they don't. The fund has a lifetime.
Yeah.
They want to invest money. They want to reinvest in their winners. They want to harvest the money, and then they want to move on to another fund. And if your pitch to them is, well, we'll have dividends for the next 50 years, I mean, do they really want to have a stake in this investment 50 years and have to keep this fund alive and filing a tax return for 50 years? No, they want to get their money back out in 10 or 12 years, either through an exit or a acquisition. Typically. It's always.
All right, and the final question. How do I get in front of an angel group, and is it like Shark Tank?
That's 2 questions.
I'll speak on behalf of how you would get in front of the local IMF group. One of the investors are typically, or one of the members are typically either know someone or we may get a reference from another angel group. that says, hey, I've got this person who has this idea, they'd like to come present. That's one way. It's a Shark Tank model to some degree, because you got to remember, if they're looking to invest $100,000, $50,000 of their monies collectively in your company, they're going to ask the questions. So I think the rule, I believe, and help me out with this, Dave, the 10-20-30 rule is what we always go by. No more than a 10-page PowerPoint, no more than 20 minutes, and no less than 30 font. And you've got to hit that. And that's one of your first criteria. And if you can't hit that, guess what? You're going to probably be out. But there are a lot of great questions. And the reason why this collective knowledge is so good, you've got attorneys, you may have financial backers, you may have doctors in certain disciplines. And depending what comes to that door, you can get questions from any of those angles that's really help present that story and makes it a much better opportunity for that group to say, yeah, this is something we need to look into and vet a little deeper and do a little more due diligence. Would you agree with that, David?
Yeah, personal network all the way to get into the angel group. And part of the reason is that person who's introducing you isn't going to want to be embarrassed, and they're going to make sure you're ready.
Exactly.
I know anyone I've taken to IMAF, we've been through several practice rounds before they present. Use your resources that you have available. Ask advice from angel investors informally. They'll be willing to help you get there. Talk with your local SBTDC office. They will do practice presentations for you so you can come in and work on it. Because the last thing the person introducing you wants to do is be embarrassed by your presentation.
Yeah, I think getting a warm introduction is really, really important. They just get a lot of business plans submitted, and again, you're trying to stand out. How many deals does IMAF look at in a year?
I'd say on average, well, this one locally, I'd probably say 25 to 35 a year, something like that.
And then,
at least we'll finally get down to looking at that. We may get hundreds in.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
you're going to, you get a bunch submitted.
Exactly.
You're trying to get yourself to the top. So that warm introduction is important. That warm introduction says something about you as a CEO and as a salesperson, that you figured out how to get to the right person to talk to, which is the life of a startup trying to sell stuff. So, that's a good test that you can pass that. And it's hard questions. So it's Shark Tank without the theater.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll get hard questions.
Let's give our panel another round of applause. At this time, I'm going to invite Marty Van Scott to give our closing remarks.
I appreciate Carlisle taking over this session for me, as I decided that it was a good time to travel around the world and meet my grandson. So thank you, Carlisle, for doing that, and thank you to our panelists for being here. The genesis of the Idea to Impact Forum was to try to begin a dialogue on our campus about, are these kinds of activities something that we should be doing here on this campus? I think for many people, it's still a novel and strange world to be thinking, can I develop a product out of my work at the university? Am I even allowed to do that? Is it accepted? And then what? Then what do I do? What we tell people generally is, don't give up your day job. Keep your wife employed or your spouse employed. But I think this is the eighth of our forum, and what we have heard over and over again, that this is an activity that can be done and should be done at this institution. I'm very grateful for all the participants that we've had. I think we've had, over the course of the year, we've had someone from every single college or school on campus who've participated. We've learned about the different valuable resources that are available on campus and in our state to help us sort through these things, because what I've learned on my own is no one's got all the answers. So we have to depend on each other to try to find these things. We've got very valuable resources here in our panel today. Some of my favorite organizations, the Biotech Center. If there's a biotech opportunity to develop. These are the best people, I think, in the country to advise us on those kinds of things. The SBTDC, certainly they've been great partners for us in our job with the technology transfer. And although I've not had direct contact with NC IDEA, my partner in cohort and climb, Marty Hackney, has participated in several projects that have come out of ECU that have been submitted to NC IDEA, and I believe some of them have been funded. So those are all wonderful resources, and we're glad to have them here. What's next? Clearly, this is the end of the forum for this year. We're going to be sitting down and having a dialogue to see, is this the kind of forum we want to continue next year, and what would that look like? So for some of you who've come here repeatedly, you probably will get a call from us, and we're going to ask you, what do you think? What do you think next steps are? Is this something we want to repeat? How do we go about doing that? And all, but I think just from my perspective, and it's highly subjective, I think that this has been a great forum. We've had a lot of good dialogue, a lot of amazing panelists who've come here and shared their knowledge and experience with us, and that's been wonderful. So I want to thank everyone who's been here today and other sessions as well. I want to thank Research and Graduate Studies, because they've been a supporter of this program, the Office of Innovation and Economic Development as well, which SBTDC and the Tech Transfer Office come out of. I do want to recognize some very important partners in this program that you might not pay much attention to, and that's our friends here from ECU TV. I didn't know much about ECU TV before we started our forum, but they stepped up to the plate and said, we can film this for you, and the quality of filming is far better than anything I could have imagined. I think it was something that you could probably publish or do in some sort of a marketable realm, and they've just been wonderful. So I want to thank our friends from ECU TV, and I actually have a gift for you all, because you've been 100% participants in the whole program, so thank you for being here. And I do have actually something that we don't typically do here, but it goes back to your school days. At the end of the year, we're approaching the end of the year for school kids now, and some of the kids get perfect attendance awards. And when we started this forum, I never would have imagined that we would have anybody who would have attended all 8 sessions, but in fact we have not only one, but we have 2 people who have attended all 8 sessions. So Yitka Varag from Physiology, stick around, I've got a gift for you, and Craig Becker as well from Health and Human Performance. So I'm not sure exactly where they're going to go, but they're here and they seem to want to know more. So very good. So I want to thank you all again for being here, and look forward to enjoying your summer, and we'll see you again in the fall. Thank you.